Welcome to Cinematic Reimaginings. If you're wondering what this is, well, it's just simply a rebranded What If. I didn't really like the What If title because I found it to be rather bland, in addition to Marvel having their comics and show having the same name. So I decided to change it to Cinematic Reimaginings. Hope you like the new name. Time to get into the subject for today's video. I thought it would be fun to look at DC's prime team of heroes, the Justice League, and see what it would look like if we got a film each decade since they were introduced. They were introduced in The Brave and the Bold number 28 in 1960, so I thought of doing a Justice League movie every decade starting in the 60s and ending in the 2000s, since we got a Justice League film for the 2010s and the 2020s, even though the latter is just the director's cut of the same film. So I felt that was a bit pointless. I will give my reasoning for each decade's actors when we get to each one. The years are for the most part pretty random, but I do have some rules that I'm going to stick by. Number one, I'm not going to be using any actors that have been cast in these roles in our timeline. No Christopher Reeve as Superman, no Michael Keaton as Batman, nothing like that. It's frankly too easy and pretty boring to just have the actors that have played those parts already in this brave new world, but they could still be open to playing other roles. I'm not doing this, but having Adam West play Green Arrow. I don't know. Something like that. And actors who were considered for the role for a movie that never got a cast together are also free game. I'm not going to be using any canceled projects to influence the films either. No using plot lines or casts from Superman Lives or Justice League Mortal to use for the films I have in mind. Trying to go with all new actors, villains, and plot lines for everything. I'm going to try and remain kind of realistic on who would be cast. I'm not going to pick Clint Eastwood as Batman in the 70s because, frankly, he would never do it in a trillion years and is honestly a horrible choice for the character. I don't get why people kept using him for that. What? So they would maybe be B to C list actors at the start in the 60s and 70s, so don't expect the biggest A-listers and the most obvious people to be part of the cast. Maybe in later decades, though, when they were starting to be taken a bit more seriously. Number 4, I'm going to be giving 3 different teams for each decades with the exception of the 60s. One of which is the team that I think they would use, and the other is the classic OG7. Even if there is another iteration of the same hero who has used the same hero name, like Green Lantern or The Flash, I'm still going to use the OG versions that were introduced in The Brave and the Bold number 28, even if it wouldn't totally work because I know filmmakers at these times don't really care about accuracy to the comics. Like I usually try to do, I'm going to be giving a director, writer, the cast of heroes, and the villain. I would also imagine that the movies we got would most likely remain the same, like Superman 78 and Batman 89. Also, each of these movies would be in a different universe. We wouldn't get 5 Justice League movies all in one universe in every decade. One would get the 60s movie, one would get the 70s movie, and so on and so forth. But that's about it for rules. Let's get into it. Firstly, we have the 1960s Justice League movie, which would come out in 1968. I'd like to believe that the Adam West show would have been happening at this time, but still wouldn't have used Adam West. It would have been a B movie at best. Firstly, we have Batman, who in my version would have been played by Robert Colbert. He was known for shows like Maverick and The Time Tunnel, as well as plenty of other Western shows. So with this, I think he could have played the grittier Batman, but also having those good looks needed for the role, as well as playing a scientist on Time Tunnel, showing his smarts needed for the character as well. Then next up we have Superman, who would be played by Jeffrey Hunter. Jeffrey Hunter was known for playing Captain Pike in the original Star Trek pilot and playing Jesus Christ in King of Kings. I think he was good at playing those tried and true heroes that Superman would have represented at the time, and this was before Clark Kent became more of a doofus as portrayed by Reeve in the 78 film. Not like that was bad, but it worked for that time. But I think he would play a Kent similar to the Reeves, as with an S, Reeves version from the TV show, but giving us a bit more of that dorkiness that could work. And I'm not trying to add in the whole Superman is Jesus portrayal. That's just how it kind of worked out. I'm not trying to, insinuate that at all. I think it's kind of a BS thing, but it's kind of funny how that worked out. Anyway, then I would have Wonder Woman, played by Lee Merriweather, more so known for playing Catwoman in Batman the movie, but I think she could do Wonder Woman, being a model like Linda Carter. Then for the Flash, she would be played by Tab Hunter. He just kind of had that look for Barry Allen, good-looking blonde guy, and a reasonably good actor who was going into a downward spiral by the time this movie would come out, so it wouldn't be too lost to have him in the role. Then I would have Aquaman, played by Grant Williams. Since Aquaman was kind of one of those lesser characters, I got a B-movie actor to play him, as he was famous for The Incredible Shrinking Man. But he played the role so well in that movie and so endearing that you couldn't help but like him, and I think that would have helped majorly with this iteration of the character. Then I have Green Lantern, played by John Gavin. I think in his role of Sam Loomis, he gave a good and stoic performance with a very do-right attitude that would be good for Hal Jordan. Then finally, I have Martian Manhunter, played by Clint Walker. I think they would just go for a really tall guy as the character, and since he's mainly a TV actor, I don't think he would have minded wearing prosthetics. Plus, he did work with an ensemble on The Dirty Dozen, so it still worked. Then since it's the 1960s, I think it would have gone for something sillier in regards to the villain, and I ultimately decided on Amazo, who would be played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. His first acting credit wasn't until 1970 with Hercules in New York, but I decided to just stretch it a bit because I don't think it would have been too unrealistic since he was already known as an amateur Mr. Universe at this point. Then I decided that Professor Ivo would be played by Jack Albertson. Now, Jack Albertson is more so known for playing Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka, but one of his last performances was for Dead and Buried, where he played the villain, and he was so fucking good that I think he could do a villain performance like this properly, whether it was more serious or sillier. Finally, I would have the writer be Lucas Heller and the director be Roger Corman. I can only see the latter doing this sort of thing. Now moving on to the 1970s, and I decided on 1976 for when this Justice League movie comes out. This will have a couple of the original team, but I ultimately decided on who was part of the Justice League around this time, but also adding in characters that I think would work for this time, because I imagine this would be a more grounded film with what was going on with movies at this point. So firstly, I have Batman, played by Timothy Dalton. He wasn't Bond yet, so he wouldn't be any sort of name just yet, even though Dalton never really became the name he kind of deserved to be, but I think Bond and Batman kind of go hand in hand a tiny bit. While Bond is definitely, an anti-hero and not a tried and true hero like Batman, I think both need to be charming and charismatic while also being a good action hero. And I think Dalton would have definitely nailed Batman. Not sure how good he is at hiding his accent, but I'm sure he would be fine. Then I have Superman, played by Perry King. I went with the more Christopher Reeve route with this one, where I went with someone who at the time would be unknown, has a similar background, and I think he has the face for it, and was in some good smaller movies. Never really became big, but I think it would still work. The first major difference in character I have is Green Arrow, who would be played by Tom Selleck. I'm not just using him because of mustache, but I do think he had the presence for it, a do-gooder but funny and a tiny bit sleazy. And this was before he hit it big with Magnum P.I., so there is that as well. When you have Green Arrow, you have Black Canary, who would be played by Farrah Fawcett. Badass Lady, who this same year would star in Charlie's Angels. She was a decent-sized name, but I think would be small enough to work, and I think she would be great for the role. Then we have the Jon Stewart Green Lantern, played by Richard Roundtree. I think that would just be perfect casting. Shaft is a very different character, but I think Roundtree could do it easily. Plus, it would help since blaxploitation was still a thing, so having the black Green Lantern would be fitting. Then I would have Elongated Man, played by James Darren. I have watched Time Tunnel, where he played a smart scientist character and then played a cop on TJ Hooker, and considering Elongated Man isn't funny like Plastic Man or how The Flash portrayed him, I think he could do it well since Elongated Man is more of a smart detective, and I think Darren could succeed in that. Then finally for this Justice League, we have Adam, played by Jack Cassidy. I was struggling with this character and Cassidy's name popped up. I think he looked fine for the role, and his son would eventually be a Flash villain, so I think it could work. Then for the villain, as I said, I think this movie would be pretty grounded in terms of who they would get for the villain, because I think 1970s movies fit that very well. So I decided on Amos Fortune as the main villain, played by Robert Shaw. Now, it's very unlikely that Shaw would do something like this, but he would be at the end of his life anyway, very unfortunately. So I think he would have agreed to it for a nice juicy payday. much like Marlon Brando. He would have been the draw for the film, much like Gene Hackman and Jack Nicholson were for their movies as the villain. Now we get to the actors if they went with the original team. So Dalton and King would be our Superman and Batman. Then I would have Wonder Woman, played by Cheryl Ladd. Decided to just use another Charlie's Angel. Then I went with The Flash, played by Martin Short. Martin Short was pretty much unknown at the time, only doing mainly television, and wouldn't do a feature until 1979. But I think it being a couple years off would be fine. And he was on TV and on stage, so it wasn't totally out of nowhere. He had that nerdy persona that could definitely work for Barry Allen and inject some humor into there too. Then I have Green Lantern, played by Ryan O'Neal. He would be pretty famous at this point, even though he wasn't really that great of an actor, but I think he could pull off what was necessary for someone like Green Lantern, and the cast surrounding him could possibly prop him up a bit. Then I decided that Aquaman would be played by William Shatner. I considered him for the 60s, but he would be too busy with Star Trek at that point, and I think he still could have done the role in the 1970s, as he was still in decent shape. Then finally, I have Martian Manhunter, played by Angus Scrimm. While known for being the villainous tall man, I think him playing an alien who was good could have been different, even though here he wouldn't have played that role just yet, so he wouldn't have been famous for it. But I think he could have definitely pulled off Martian Manhunter. Then for the writer, I have Cary Bates and Dan O'Bannon, and for the director, I have Don Siegel. Mainly because for the latter, he did both sci-fi and action, and I think that would work here. Now we get to the very ridiculous 1980s, where superhero movies would have been full steam ahead in 1985. The 80s, I feel, would give them a bigger budget and more well-known names, but I decided to go for something really different and use Justice League Detroit as the main team lineup. First things first is Batman, played by William Peterson. I think Peterson could most definitely pull off Batman. Manhunter is one of those movies that shows he could have done a great job with the role, going for a darker Batman who's maybe barely in control. I think that would have fit with the overall vibe of this. Then we have Aquaman, played by Patrick Swayze. Aquaman at this point in the comics would be the leader of the Justice League and going fully in on being a superhero after his son died. I think Swayze had more depth to him as an actor, and I think he would do a great job with something darker like this for this version of Aquaman. Then I have Zatanna, played by Karen Allen. I just look at her and I think she could be perfect. Marion is one of the best heroines of the 1980s, but I think she had a certain vibe that would fit for Zatanna as well. Then I have Martian Manhunter, played by Rutger Hauer, more so known for playing bad guys. I think he would handle this very well, just because of how excellent and underrated he was as an actor. Then we get to the new recruits. I have Steel, played by Rob Lowe. He would have been very young, but it kind of fits the personality of someone who is inexperienced as a hero, as Steel was when he joined the team. Then I have Vixen, played by Grace Jones. I could not see anyone else in the role as Vixen of the 1980s. Too perfect. Then I have Vibe, played by S.I. Morales. Again, fits into the younger, more inexperienced idea that the new recruits would have. Then finally, I have Gypsy, played by Rachel Ticotin. Since nobody in the 80s really cared about how accurate races were, it wouldn't have actually mattered that she wasn't Romani. Although, ironically, her first ever role was as a gypsy dancer. So, there you go. Then we have the villain, and I wanted to have something that would fit the 80s very well. So I went with an alien who Justice League Detroit fought. I went with Despero, who is played physically by Kevin Peter Hall and voiced by Tony Todd. I think having someone tall and imposing would be great, so I decided to use the Predator himself. Then Tony Todd just has too much of a great villain voice, so with this character, I pulled a Darth Vader. Now, the thing I really wanted to get into with the 80s is having the OG team, because I think I have a perfect lineup for the original team of the 1980s. So, we have Peterson, Swayze, and Hauer as their characters. Firstly, I have Superman, played by Dennis Quaid. From the look, to the charisma, to the acting ability, I think Quaid would be an amazing Superman. Plus, it helps his son is voicing the character currently. So there you go. Then I have Wonder Woman, played by Adrienne Barbeau. She had some prowess with DC being in Swamp Thing, so I think Wonder Woman would be the next step. She had the body type and the looks, but I think could throw down when needed, especially in something like Escape from New York. Then for the Flash, I have Michael J. Fox. Again, I just think that is perfect casting, along with Green Lantern, played by Tom Cruise. Come on, he was essentially halfway fucking there with Top Gun, which wouldn't have come out yet, and I don't think Cruise would have played 2 test pilots in a row, but he would just be too goddamn perfect. With this, The writer would be Stephen E. D'Souza, and the director would be Nick Castle. Now we have the 1990s, where everything would be treated a bit more seriously, specifically in 1993, due to the Batman 89 film being at the forefront of what superhero films should be, in a way. So with this, we get our Justice League, who I based on one of the lineups of Justice League International. Firstly, we have Batman, played by Alec Baldwin. I think he would have made for a great Batman of the 1990s, and it helped that he was in The Shadow, which was a character that heavily inspired Batman. Now we have Fire and Ice, played by Rosie Perez and Jamie Lee Curtis, respectively. Again, the 90s didn't really care about being specific in regards to what race they actually were, so I can't imagine they would care for anything like that. So both would just become Americans, similar to what they did in that awful JLA pilot. Not the best comparison, but again, it was for the time. Then we have the Ted Kord Blue Beetle, played by Tim Robbins, because I think he could do nerdy really well, which is what Kord kind of is, but not too big of a star. Then for Booster Gold, I have Kevin Bacon. Maybe a bit of an off-kilter choice, but I think he could do the comedy very well, and he's very charming, but he can also play a little bit of a dumbass character. He would essentially be playing his character from Tremors again, but like maybe a little bit dumber, but I think he would be perfect for that kind of role. Then I would have Dr. Fate, played by Roger Moore. I just decided to go with the Kent Nelson version because the Eric and Linda Strauss version is really fucking weird and really messed up that I don't think that they would have gone for that. It's just too weird. Don't even look it up. It's just too weird. Then for the Guy Gardner Green Lantern, I have Thomas F. Wilson. I think that is just pitch perfect casting as a dumbass meathead that Gardner was in the 1990s. Finally, there is Mr. Miracle, played by Terry O'Quinn. Underrated actor, but I don't think they would get anyone major for Mr. Miracle, since he wasn't a very well-known character either. Then, I think the Gray Man, played by Hugo Weaving, would make for a good villain for around this time. Hugo Weaving is a quintessential bad guy actor. Then on top of that, the Gray Man is a character that isn't too crazy, but has mystical vibes and has ire with Dr. Fate that they could bring into the fold here. Then for the original team version, I have Superman, played by Billy Campbell. I think he did a good job with the Rocketeer and fits into that vibe of Superman. Then Wonder Woman would be played by Sandra Bullock. Not the most perfect casting, but she was the favorite for many years when they tried to get a Wonder Woman movie off the ground. Then I have The Flash, played by Carrie Elways. I'm going off of the more subdued Elways in stuff like The Crush, but has a charisma like in Robin Hood Men in Tights. Then I have Green Lantern, played by Bill Paxton. While more so known for douchey characters, I think stuff like Twister shows he could have that vibe of Hal Jordan if necessary, like the more stoic energy, but still having a good time with what he does. Then Aquaman would be played by Simon Baker, not a very big actor, but considering Aquaman is kind of a joke character, I guess that could work. Then I have Martian Manhunter, played by Peter Weller, mainly due to his role in RoboCop, playing a robotic-esque character that works for the more emotionless John Jones. The writer is David Cope, and the director is Tony Scott. Scott was the first choice to direct Man of Steel, so I think he could do a great superhero film, albeit one that is very different from a Superman film, and, having that prowess. Now we get to the final decade of the video. Superhero movies were getting more and more popular, so I think we could get a kick-ass 2000s Justice League movie in specifically 2004. First, I have Superman, played by Matt Bomer. The man was perfect in the 2000s, although he did say recently that he was supposed to play Superman for either Superman Returns or Justice League Mortal or another canceled Superman movie, but was denied because he was gay. Maybe on this different alternate universe world, people are more accepting, and we got him in the role because I think he would have just been so goddamn perfect. Then for Batman, I have Guy Pearce. Now that is a bit out of left field because I think he would have been a better Batman than Bruce Wayne with how many darker/grittier characters he has done. However, I think he could pull it off, especially with how much of a goody two-shoes he was in LA Confidential. That love of justice, I think, could be attributed to Batman, so I think that would work. And he was really smart in that role, so definitely works. Then there is Wonder Woman, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. I had her in one of my previous videos as Wonder Woman, and she's just too perfect, so fuck it. Then there is the Kyle Rayner Green Lantern, played by Freddie Prinze Jr., who I think could pull off that more fun and creative kind of character that Kyle Rayner is. Plus, he was big at the time, and he is a quarter Puerto Rican on his father's side, and Rayner is half Mexican, so it kind of works in that regard, even though, again, they didn't care about that at this point. Then I had the Wally West Flash, played by Alan Tudyk. I think he had the look and has the personality to do that and do that well. Then there is Aquaman, played by Chad Michael Murray, big heartthrob actor for the time, and would fit into the mold that they were going for with the character. Then for Martian Manhunter, I have Kyle MacLachlan. He has played an alien in The Hidden, and he did that very well. And he's a pretty weird dude, so I think this role fits him like a glove, whether it is more absurd or more stoic. Then finally, we have Plastic Man, played by Matthew Lillard. He has said he wants to play the role in this day and age, but personally, I think he would just be too old. However, in 2004, he would have been perfect. He has that slapstick, goofy side that would have been great for the character. Then for the villains, I had two ideas. First would be a generic bad guy like the White Martians, which would all just be CGI. Terrible CGI because of the time, but still. But the other idea I had would be the Legion of Doom / Injustice Gang / Injustice League. Whatever the hell it would be called. Just the opposite of what Justice League is. The lineup I have is Brainiac, played by Gary Oldman. I think he would be open to something like this, and he would be great in the role like he usually is. I mean, he was, Commissioner Gordon, so that kind of works, right? Anyway, then I have Riddler, played by Hugh Laurie. He was a favorite for the time. Then Giganta, played by Dina Meyer. Generic redhead actress. Major Force, played by Dolph Lundgren, something that could be personal for Kyle Rayner's Green Lantern. Captain Cold, played by Michael C. Hall. This was before he really hit it big, so it would be good, and he plays good villains, obviously. Then finally, Black Manta, played by Jimon Hounsou. Already played multiple DC roles at this point, so he would be fine with that, and he is a fucking great actor. Not a ton of alternate casting, since this is as close to the original League as you can get, but for Hal Jordan, I have Josh Brolin. He was the frontrunner for the Lantern show, and I think he would have fit better in the 2000s than now. Then Barry Allen, played by Noah Weil. He kind of played a similar role in ER, so I think he would work as Barry. But that is it for this cinematic reimagining. Feel free to leave me any suggestions in the comments below for whatever you want to see next, or who would you pick for these roles with the parameters I personally set up. See you all next month for another video.